They discovered him after 4 days of laying there in agony, with no doctor or assistance. The iconic Gene Barry, who captivated audiences with his portrayal of Bat Masterson, experienced a severe head injury after a fall, causing brain hemorrhage. However, no one at the posh elderly facility even thought to dial 911. It was already too late when they took action. The stunning revelations surrounding his last days are only the tip of the iceberg in a Hollywood horror tale that no one anticipated. Eugene Class was born Gene Barry in Manhattan, New York City, on June 14, 1919. His musically inclined parents, Martin Class and Eva Kahn, were immigrants from Russia who were Jewish. Though he had a day job as a jeweler, Martin's true calling was playing the violin. Their home was filled with tunes as Eva, an amateur singer, sang them. They had a profound impact on Eugene's formative years, laying the groundwork for his musical career. His multicultural upbringing at 1446 59th Street in Brooklyn exposed him to a wide range of artistic traditions. The Great Depression exacerbated the difficulty of living conditions. Despite their limited means, his parents never stopped supporting his artistic pursuits. Their unwavering belief was that their son's musical talent was valuable enough to nurture through thick and thin. Eugene was already well established as a talented musician when he enrolled at New Utrecht High School. He aspired to a career in classical music, inspired by his father's enthusiasm for the instrument. Then something happened during a high school football game that altered everything. He had aspirations of becoming a professional musician, but a devastating arm injury dashed his dreams. Devastatingly, the accident occurred. He had always lived for music. He had fought so hard for this, and now it was abruptly out of his reach. He kept going because he found solace in his voice. He had always loved singing, but now it was his life's work. He realized his baritone voice was rather remarkable. In order to unlock fresh opportunities, he received a scholarship at the Chatham Square School of Music from RCA chairman David Sarnoff when he was 17 years old. That was the moment that changed my life. He was able to hone his skills and get ready for more prospects with the formal instruction he received via the scholarship. While working as a nightclub performer and radio host for 2 years, he trained his voice and studied music theory. For financial reasons, he worked every job he could get his hands on. The duration of certain gigs varied. He once had a brief stint working at a nightclub before being fired, but he refused to let it derail him. Arthur Godfrey's talent scouts provided him further exposure when he won a talent contest. A reputation for himself was gradually emerging. He made a significant choice about this time. He was in search of a moniker that reflected his aspirations. He decided to go by Gene Barry after actor John Barrymore. It was more than simply a name change. He was making his aspiration known, to be a performer who could hold an audience's attention no matter where they were. His perseverance was rewarded in 1942 with parts in Broadway shows like New Moon. At the tender age of 23, he stepped into the role of Captain Paul Duval in the operetta revival of Sigmund Romberg. A young actor hailing from Brooklyn, this was a huge break for him. Although he was born Eugene Class, Barry honed his singing voice at London's prestigious Chatham Square Music School. Thanks to his scholarship, he was able to hone his skills. He was a veteran of Carnegie Hall's semi-staged operettas before making the jump to Broadway. Romance and political intrigue abound in The New Moon, a novel set in 18th-century New Orleans. For Barry, it was the ideal production in which to display his talents. Audiences and reviewers alike were captivated by his dominating presence and powerful voice. The Theatre World Award, given annually to the best Broadway debuts, was bestowed upon him that year. He decided to reinvent himself as a performer after this accomplishment. His hero, John Barrymore, inspired him to alter his name to Gene Barry. He joined the cast of Mae West's renowned Broadway production of Catherine Was Great in 1944, 2 years after that. Despite his portrayal of Lieutenant Bounine, the part itself was not the most formative aspect of this encounter. Betty Kelb was the person I met. She went under the stage name Julie Carson when performing in the chorus. Barry and Betty had a strong bond during rehearsals, which soon blossomed into something more substantial. There was drama throughout their love affair. Reportedly, Mae West did not want another blonde performing because of her reputation for micromanaging her shows. To cover up her naturally blonde hair, Betty had begun using a black wig. However, she was let go just before the show's debut after West discovered the truth. It was possible that there was a setback. However, it turned out to be the beginning of something far more significant. After continuing their relationship, Barry and Betty tied the knot on October 22, 1944. They achieved the unusual feat of having a marriage that lasted over 60 years in the entertainment industry. Michael was born in 1946 and Frederick in 1953. In 1967, they adopted Elizabeth, a daughter. Even though Betty only performed on Broadway for a short while, she laid the groundwork for Barry's career and was there for him as he made the transition to Hollywood. Barry had a hard time breaking through on Broadway, even after breakout roles in The New Moon and Catherine was great. Rosalinda, based on Die Flatter Maus, and The Would-Be Gentleman, by Molière, were among the performances in which he appeared. These performances, however, failed to boost his reputation. His position as Falk failed to provide the breakthrough he had anticipated, despite Rosalinda's 2-year run. When employment were few, Barry had to look for work outside of the theater to make ends meet. Following his departure from Catherine Was Great in 1944, he was unable to secure employment. Selling jewelry was only one of several jobs he took. Even though it was a very trying moment, he persisted. When Hollywood took notice, he finally turned a corner. Hollywood Screen Test was a talent exhibition that Barry was a part of in 1951. He was signed to a contract by Paramount Pictures when it drew their notice. During that period, Barry was a part of the television industry's transformation of Hollywood. Despite several less-than-ideal roles, his early years at Paramount were fruitful. His magnetism shone through even in low-budget films, where he was cast. In 1952's Cold War drama The Atomic City, he made his film debut as nuclear scientist Dr. Frank Addison, whose son is abducted by foreign agents. Los Alamos, New Mexico, a top-secret government facility at the time, served as the backdrop for the picture. The movie felt more realistic than others because of that unusual access. With his outstanding performance, Barry solidified his position as a formidable leading man, and the film was nominated for an Oscar for Best Screenplay. An even more substantial chance presented itself the following year, as his career continued to gain speed. The War of the Worlds, a science fiction epic he appeared in 1953, was a watershed point in his career. Reimagining H.G. Wells' famous tale in 1950s California, the film was directed by Byron Haskin and produced by George Powell. Dr. Clayton Forrester, a scientist entangled in an extraterrestrial invasion, was portrayed by Barry. At a time when anxieties about the Cold War were at an all-time high, the film's themes of scientific discovery and survival struck a chord with viewers, and the innovative special effects won an Oscar. Barry's presentation was spot-on. He was composed, perceptive, and focused. He solidified his position as a Hollywood leading man after becoming the face of one of the most renowned science fiction pictures of the age. He had the opportunity to collaborate with some of the industry's most famous names by 1955. He co-starred with Clark Gable and Susan Hayward in Soldier of Fortune, a Hong Kong-set Cold War action film. Played by Barry was journalist Louis Hoyt, who was incarcerated in communist China on allegations of espionage. Much of the narrative revolves around the capture of his character, and Hayward's character, aided by Gable's smuggler-turned-hero, attempts to rescue him. Although Gable was the main attraction, Barry's performance lent credibility to the plot, demonstrating his ability to compete with Hollywood heavy hitters. It was a daring film. In order to increase the film's authenticity, Gable shot scenes on location in Hong Kong, whilst Hayward used studio backlots. Although Barry viewed it as an opportunity to broaden his acting repertoire, Hollywood retained a preconceived notion of him. That presented him with an obstacle. He exuded all the qualities of a traditional leading man: good looks, charisma, and charisma. The downside was that he continued to play the same kind of parts. He portrayed a refined cowboy in the 1954 musical western Red Garters. Subsequently, Barry came clean about his desire for other types of roles. Instead of always playing the dapper gentleman, he aspired to portray more commonplace individuals like fathers, grandfathers, and others. Bat Masterson, created by Gene Barry, was a groundbreaking television show that debuted on NBC in 1958. Despite the prevalence of westerns at that period, this program had a unique hero. Barry, who usually plays rough and gruff cowboys, portrayed a lawman who was cool, collected, and in command at all times. In addition to his pinstripe suit and black bowler hat, he also carried a cane with a gold point for practical reasons. If he ever needed a weapon, he could use it. However, he was more comfortable using logic than violence to resolve disagreements. From October 8, 1958, to June 1, 1961, the show aired 107 half-hour episodes over the course of 3 seasons. William Barclay Bat Masterson, an actual American lawman, gambler, and writer, served as inspiration. While acting as sheriff of Dodge City, the actual Masterson was presented with a cane by the citizens and was renowned for his keen clothing. All of these little subtleties were magnified by the program. In a genre rife with jaded gunslingers, Barry's Masterson stood out as an intelligent and charismatic man. Bat Masterson captivated viewers right from the start. Bill Lee's rendition of The Ballad of Bat Masterson served as the opening theme music, establishing the unique Western hero that was to come. Masterson lived a nomadic life, going from town to aid the downtrodden. The show's tone was lighter and more lighthearted than other westerns of the period because of his talent at escaping perilous situations without using violence. We were all quite impressed by it. Gene Barry injected a lot of life and humor to the part. The program's theatrical nature was due in large part to Masterson's ability to confidently deliver cutting speech, which made him a memorable figure even after the show had finished. Outstanding Actor nomination for the Primetime Emmy in 1959. The show's editing was also nominated for Best in Show. Thanks to Bat Masterson, Barry became a huge celebrity on television. He had previous film credits, including 1952's The Atomic City, before he got the part. His career, however, was defined by this job. Television was mostly devoted to westerns by the late 1950s. Rawhide, Gunsmoke, and Wagon Train were some of the most watched shows that year. By providing a unique product, Bat Masterson was able to carve out a niche for itself. Audiences were treated to a Western hero who depended on charisma and intelligence rather than yet another gloomy, gun-toting cowboy. Soon after, merchandise with the likeness of Barry was introduced. Toys, comic books, and other memorabilia gained a lot of traction among the younger demographic. Reruns continued to draw in new fans long after the show's 1961 finale had finished, ensuring that Bat Masterson's universe would continue to expand. Gene Barry reprised his role as Bat Masterson several years after the show had aired its last episode. In the 1990 episode A Gathering of Guns of Paradise, he played an elderly Bat Masterson. Hugh O'Brien, who played Wyatt Earp, was one of several iconic TV lawmen who appeared in the show. In The Gambler Returns, The Luck of the Draw, released the following year, Barry made a triumphant return to the character. In this 1991 made-for-TV film, iconic Western TV personalities made an appearance. It was a tribute to the history of the genre, and seeing Barry again brought back all the reasons Bat Masterson was so special. When Gene Barry played Amos Burke in 1963's Burke's Law, his career took a sharp turn. His role as a Western lawman had previously brought him the most fame. It was all transformed by this show. Barry filled the role of the head of the Los Angeles Police Department's Homicide Division for a season, 1963 to 1966. It was a novel idea. Amos Burke had an enormous fortune, but he decided to spend it all on crime solving. As he continued to pursue criminals, he lived the high life thanks to his riches, which was rumored to have come from an inheritance and astute investments. Barry was a natural in that job. Burke was captivating and commanding due of his self-assured manner. He was named Best Actor at the 1965 Golden Globes for his role. The blend of mystery, humor, and beauty in Burke's Law was what set it apart. You wouldn't expect a detective program like this. Burke wasn't your average smoky office-wearing trenchcoat cop. He solved crimes with charisma and brains as a detective for the upper class, living it up in mansions. Barry, according to producer Aaron Spelling, is most comfortable in a tuxedo. And it was his Burke performance to A.T. The witty one-liners that made the character famous were called Burke's Laws. You should never ask a question until you know the answer. This and other catchphrases became the show's trademark. The play was already riveting, but Burke's journey through his universe was absolutely captivating. Crime sites weren't the only places he went. An elegant 1962 Rolls-Royce Silver Cloud II was used as his chauffeur. There was more to this automobile than meets the eye. Included in its legendary status was a precursor to the automobile phone, a revolutionary invention in the early 1960s. Burke stood out from the crowd due to the stark contrast between his glitzy personal life and his serious investigative job. He was devoted to doing what was right even while he lived in opulence in a huge 19-room estate. Guests featured prominently in Burke's legislation, which was another distinguishing feature. To make the murder cases even more glitzy, the show frequently featured famous actors and actresses. Famous guest performers were a big draw in subsequent programs like Murder, She Wrote, and Columbo, which were influenced by this strategy. Aside from its widespread impact, Burke's Law was beloved for its blend of mystique, grace, and comedy. Nearly 3 decades after the first series concluded, CBS revived Burke's Law in 1994. Amos Burke, now a deputy chief, was played by Gene Barry, who had returned. The program added a fresh spin this time around. Peter Barton played Burke's son, who was an employee with him. The revival maintained many aspects of the original program, such as the opulent locations, witty banter, and, of course, Burke's signature one-liners. Fans of the 60s espionage genre would have loved the cameo appearances by actors from shows like iEspionage and The Avengers. The remake from the 90s, despite all of these improvements, could never match the original's enchantment. Younger viewers didn't relate to it, and critics said it was too campy and uninspiring. A significant alteration was the history of Burke. Henry, his loyal chauffeur, helped him raise his son when he lost his wife in the rebirth. Although this made the character more relatable, it diminished the original's charismatic air of autonomous high society. As the entertainment industry evolved, Gene Barry continued to reinvent himself. An ambitious NBC series that aired from 1968 to 1971, he played Glenn Howard in The Name of the Game, which became one of his most memorable performances. Compared to other shows of the period, this one stood out due to its innovative concept, which had 3 rotating leads. Each 90-minute episode cost around $400,000, making it the most costly show ever made at the time. Played by Barry was the shrewd and strong publishing magnate Glenn Howard of Howard Publications. No, he was more than that. He frequently assumed command of cases with significant stakes and was deeply involved in the investigating process. While investigating political scandals and environmental crimes, his character monitored the work of 2 reporters, Tony Francios's Jeff Dillon and Robert Stack's Dan Farrell, in uncovering malfeasance. The opening episode, A Fear of High Places, was a riveting political thriller that established the tone for the rest of the series. One of the most memorable characters on the show, Glenn Howard, was brought to life by Barry's portrayal of the ideal blend of charisma and authority. With its 76 episodes spread across 3 seasons, The Name of the Game was a watershed moment in television history, setting the stage for subsequent anthology series such as NBC Mystery Movie and The Bold Ones. Barry returned to Broadway in 1983 with La Cage du Falls, following years of success on television. Alongside George Hearn as Albin, he portrayed George, the proprietor of a homosexual bar in Saint-Tropez. The revolutionary musical was adapted from a French drama written in 1973. As the first big Broadway hit to center on a gay romance, it broke new ground by introducing LGBTQ+ topics to a wide audience. Barry gave an emotionally charged and subtle performance. He refrained from using stereotypical portrayals of George in favor of showing him as a loving and committed spouse who prioritizes his family. For his performance in the part, he was nominated for a Tony Award for Best Actor in 1984. Despite losing to his co-star Hearn, Barry regarded La Cage aux Folles as the pinnacle of his acting career. Over the course of its 4-year run, 1,761 performances, and 6 Tony Awards, including Best Musical, the play was a smashing success. Following his time on Broadway, Barry kept on traveling with the show, stopping in big towns like Los Angeles and San Francisco. In addition to his work on television and Broadway, Barry derived great pleasure from performing with his wife, Betty Claire Kalb. Among the many musicals in which they appeared together were On a Clear Day, You Can See Forever, No, Nanette, and Fiddler on the Roof, in which Barry had the role of TV. They started performing together more often in the 1970s, as his film career was winding down. Like Gene Barry, Barry performed solo vocal performances in their tiny cabaret events. Keeping occupied wasn't the only goal of his job with Betty. Their close relationship shone through. Prior to Betty's passing in 2003, they were wed for over 60 years. Shared his love of music and storytelling with the one who meant the most to him through their live performances, staying connected to his enthusiasm for live audiences. Unexpected circumstances led to the beginning of Gene Barry's romance with Betty Claire Kalb. She appeared in films and television shows as Julie Carson. She appeared in the 1944 drama Catherine Was Great alongside Mae West. A glitch, nevertheless, did exist. Due to Mae West's aversion to blondes, Betty was unable to keep her role. There was yet hope for her. This time, she wore a black wig to her audition. Everything went smoothly. The part was returned to her. By some stroke of luck, she also crossed paths with Gene Barry. Their initial encounter was never meant to have any romantic overtones. On separate dates, they were enjoying one another's company. That night, though, everything changed. They ended up switching dates and falling in love by the night's conclusion. One of the longest marriages in Hollywood began with their October 22, 1944, wedding. The first several years were challenging. Finding consistent work was difficult for Gene. He had 4 unsuccessful stage productions in the early half of their marriage. Tension may have arisen due to the stress of a profession that is unclear. But Betty's trust in him remained unshaken. She never forced him to do parts he wasn't interested in. On the contrary, she urged him to press on. Afterwards, Gene admitted that he might not have achieved his Hollywood success without her encouragement. As time went on, their family expanded. Michael was born to them in 1946, their first son. Frederick, their second son, was born to them in 1953, 7 years after they had their first son. Elizabeth, their adoptive daughter, was born afterward. Despite Gene's long hours on set, Betty remained at home to take care of the family and provide stability for their children. It wasn't until the 1950s that Gene's doggedness paid off. He became famous on television with shows like Burke's Law and Bat Masterson and secured roles in films like 1953's The War of the Worlds. He was soaring in his career. But Betty was still the center of his universe no matter what. Next was the most challenging chapter. Just weeks before she would have turned 80 years old, Betty died on January 31, 2003. Even though they had been together for over 60 years, Gene suddenly found himself alone. Devastated was he. His biggest source of strength, he said time and time again, was her. He did not remarry. Rather, he cherished the time he spent with his children and grandkids and reflected on the memories they had made together. Gene made sure his kids understood how much he loved them despite the fact that juggling stardom with family was never easy for him. He was absent more often than he would have liked due to his demanding filming schedule, but he always managed to fit them in. Whether it was a special occasion, a vacation, or just a regular day, he made sure they never felt overlooked. His children spoke about how they understood his affection for them and their mom from a young age. Even though Gene Barry lived for another 6 years following Betty's death, nothing ever remained the same. Gene Barry became famous for his self-assurance and charisma. He was the easygoing Hollywood leading guy who starred in Bat Masterson and Burke's Law. He left an indelible impression with his charisma, humor, and voice. Something had changed, though, by the middle of the 2000s. The once comfortable actor was having trouble recalling specifics from his own life. The frequency of the slips got intolerable after a while. His loved ones saw the warning signs, disorientation, forgetfulness, and frustrations that were so out of character for him. The diagnosis of Alzheimer's illness followed. It was at this period when Barry entered his mid-80s. In addition to his Tony nomination for Broadway's La Cage du Falls, he had spent decades delighting audiences as a cinema star in films like 1953's The War of the Worlds. Unfortunately, the illness had now wiped out all of that. He had a hard time keeping his lines straight. The tales he used to adore telling had slipped his mind. His characteristic acerbic nature began to soften. Alzheimer's disease manifested in more ways than one. It was painful to see how it transformed him. He used to be rather charming, but now he gets angry and withdraws. A new, unrecognizable version of him emerged as the illness ate away at his character. Everyone in his family pitched in, comforting him as he gradually faded away. It became too much for Barry to handle by June 2009. He entered the Woodland Hills, California, Sunrise Assisted Living Center in the year 1990. They were hoping he would get the treatment he needed at that facility. It worked for a while. There were times when he looked more invested, when he was himself again. Although the progression of Alzheimer's disease is unrelenting, the toll remains high. Tragic events occurred a scant 6 months afterwards. Inside the facility, Barry had a terrible fall on December 5, 2009. His skull took a blow. A severe hip fracture, shattered ribs, and brain damage resulted from the accident. What followed was even worse than the initial incident. His relatives then said that the facility's personnel were slow to respond. Appropriate medical personnel were not immediately notified. Did not receive relief from my discomfort for 4 days. The time he received the treatment he needed was after it had already been too late. Gene Barry died on December 9, 2009. Claims of carelessness followed his demise. His offspring took legal action by suing Sunrise Assisted Living Center, claiming that the facility's employees had broken their promises on the kind of care they would give. This institution had lied to them about its capacity to care for people with severe dementia, in their opinion. The case highlighted systemic problems in the elderly care industry and prompted important inquiries into the inner workings of these institutions and the ease with which patients might be neglected. Despite the progression of Alzheimer's disease, Barry still saw flashbacks to his younger self from time to time. Michael, his son, recounted how his charismatic and humorous dad would still manage to crack a joke whenever he was confused. His former Hollywood celebrity status was visible to those who cared for him. For his loved ones, even if they were fleeting, these moments were priceless.